primary care.
Dear Professor Hammer and Professor Herrmann, vielen Dank für Ihre freundlichen Worte. Gerne wäre ich heute in Berlin gewesen, aber auf jeden Fall im Herzen. Thank you for your kind words and for giving me the floor. I would have loved to be in Berlin today, but unfortunately, circumstances mean that we have to meet virtually. However, my heart is there with you in Berlin, a city that means a lot to me and a country where part of my family lives. Dear colleagues, thank you for joining us. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Raquel Gomez for the invitation on behalf of the Organizing and Scientific Committee and the opportunity to address this topic. I still remember the conversation that we had in Korea 2 years ago about the possibility of holding this conference and how much it could help to raise awareness. But before we get to the main topic, I would like to disclose my conflict of interest. I work as a doctoral researcher at the University of Luxembourg, focused on domestic violence and medical education. I'm a member of the Société Scientifique Luxembourgeoise de Médecine Générale, and I belong to SEMFIC, the Spanish Society of Family and Community Medicine. I'm also a member of the executive of the Wonga Special Interest Group on Family Violence, where I have met many outstanding professionals who have both inspired and mentored me. I would like to spread my deepest gratitude to all of them. It is because of them that I'm here today. When I started thinking about how to approach this topic, the first thing that came to my mind was the paradox that we are living in with regards to family violence. And I would like to give you an example. Here you can see the main causes of mortality among women and men in the European countries in 2016. Cardiovascular diseases accounted for 36% of cases, making it the leading cause of death also worldwide. I believe you all know how to prevent and treat cardiovascular diseases on patients. What about family violence? I'm making this comparison just to put this in perspective because statistics are actually pretty similar. Specifically, violence against women. 1 in 3 women in the world will experience physical or sexual violence in their lifetimes, mostly perpetrated by their partners. This gives some idea of the magnitude of the problem that we are facing. We all know about cardiovascular diseases, but still, family violence remains challenging. And that's why I use this term, paradox. It is affecting almost as many people as cardiovascular diseases, and at the same time is largely unreported or ignored. It is a worldwide phenomenon and still a hidden pandemic. Family violence is a broader term that refers to violence or abuse that occurs within the family, regardless of whether it is inflicted in public or private. It can happen to anyone of any race, age, sexual orientation, religion, or gender, and affects people of all socioeconomic backgrounds and level of education. Family violence can be defined as any form of abuse, action, threats, coercion, or manipulation that influence other person, causing suffering or harm. There are different types of violence, as you can see: verbal, physical, sexual, emotional, economical, institutional, or psychological, among others, including the new forms of abuse facilitated by technologies such as cyberstalking, sexting, or revenge porn. None of these are exclusive. They might overlap each other. Family violence is usually not a single episode, but an ongoing pattern of behavior that gradually undermines victim confidence and ability to leave their abuser. The severity and the frequency of violence often escalates over time. Violence can take many forms, such as domestic violence or intimate partner violence between partners or ex-partners, child abuse or neglect, elder abuse or neglect, abuse vicarious of dependent people, female genital mutilation, forced and underage marriage, the so-called honor crimes, witnessing abuse within the family. But the most frequent form is domestic violence or intimate partner violence, which is also a form or gender violence. We mentioned that 1 in 3 women will experience abuse during their lifetimes, But here are some other important statistics. 1 in 10 men have experienced intimate partner violence or sexual violence. 1 in 4 adults have been exposed to physical abuse in childhood. 1 in 5 women and 1 in 13 men have reported childhood sexual abuse. And 1 in 6 people over the age of 60 have suffered from some form of abuse over the past year. And I would like to ask you, how many women do you attend in your practice? How many elderly are you taking care of? And I would like to encourage you to make the calculations, because the consequences of family violence are devastating. Family violence can affect physical, mental, sexual, and reproductive health, resulting in major social and economic costs. It not only affects those who experience it directly, but also those who witness it. Consequences can be fatal, resulting in suicide, homicide, lead to physical injuries in 42% of the women, lead to permanent disability, or have an impact on sexual and reproductive health, resulting in unintended pregnancies, abortions, gynecological problems or STD, or mental health, anxiety, eating disorders, post-traumatic stress, sleeping disturbance, doubling the risk of depression or alcohol abuse. In 90% of the cases, victims don't come to our consultation with explicit demand. Symptoms are vague or unexplainable. Reports offered include headaches, back pain, abdominal pain, or gastrointestinal disorders. I'm sure you recognize yourself dealing with these reasons for seeking consultations. If we think about children, maltreatment causes stress that is associated with the disruption or early brain development in children, as you can see here in the adverse childhood experience pyramid. Consequently, as adults, they are at higher risk of behavioral, physical, and mental health problems. It can also impair the immune, endocrine, and other systems. And also, violence against children contributes to inequalities in education. Victims are 13% less likely to graduate from school. Obviously, all these has an economical impact, including costs of increased utilization of health services, such as hospitalization, mental health treatment, child welfare, and long-term health costs. If we look at the other end of the age spectrum, elder abuse can also result in physical injuries, ranging from minor scratches and bruises to broken bones and long-term disabilities. Even relatively minor injuries can cause permanent damage or premature death in elderly people. Long-lasting psychological consequences such as anxiety and depression are also a common concern. Imagine by 2050, the number of older persons is expected to double and reach 2.1 billion. Can we expect an increase of elder abuse also, and its consequences? Are we ready to face it? Having considered these statistics, I would like to make an urgent appeal to you. Dear colleagues, it's time to wake up. As family doctors, we have an important role to play in addressing these problems. Primary care teams might be the first or only point of contact for victims who are hesitant or unable to seek other forms of assistance. Why is that? Because we are accessible. We see people frequently in our consultation rooms. We provide continuity of care and build a relationship based on trust. We can monitor people's progress over a long period of time, longitudinality. Therefore, it's our responsibility to address family and gender-based violence. Due to time restraints, I will focus specifically on intimate partners violence today, as it's the most prevalent form of violence within families. 7 years ago, in 2013, WHO stated that this type of violence affected 30% of women worldwide. And Margaret Chan, the general director at that time, called it a global health problem of epidemic proportions. The problem is that women don't tend to disclose abuse unless they are specifically asked about it. Although statistics show that abused women use healthcare services more than non-abused women, and they also identify healthcare providers as the professionals that they would trust the most when disclosing abuse, only 4% of the victims report spontaneously. So we have to start asking. You might be wondering whether it's appropriate to come out and ask such a personal questions. I would like to tell you about a survey conducted by the Fundamental Rights Agency in 2014 across 28 member states within the European Union and included 42,000 women. 87% of the participants said that they would find it acceptable for their doctor to ask about their home life if they turn up with a physical injury or displaying symptoms that might suggest some kind of abuse. Yes, we do have a privileged position for prevention and early detection, yet the involvement of family doctors has been generally low. A review of the literature suggests some reasons for this. Time constraints, not having enough time, lack of sufficient training, not knowing how to ask the right question or how to manage the case once the victim discloses it, the incapacity of frustration when dealing with it, not knowing how the system works, which agencies to approach for support, how to report incidents, or which policies and procedures to follow. Fear of legal repercussions, fear of offending the patient or perpetrator, especially in rural or isolated communities, fear of unpredictable reactions. Doctors who have previously tried to intervene and had a bad experience can also be unwilling to try again. Some professionals have also experienced reluctance to address the issue due to personal beliefs that conflict with their professional roles, such as traditional gender norms, cultural beliefs, and stereotypes. In some cases, they are simply unwilling to believe their testimonies and may even try to blame the victim. Such prejudice and lack of sensitivity is also an important barrier to formulating an appropriate and professional approach to situations of abuse. And this does not relate only to primary care professionals. We can find similar concerns among other specialties, professionals, and healthcare settings. All of these studies underline the need for additional training and the interest of professionals in learning more. The system itself needs to play an active role in helping doctors to identify domestic abuse by allowing them more time with patients, providing training and education, more guidance, support, resources, a solid framework, developing policies and procedures for reporting issues, and coordinating information between departments and specialties, implementing a solid referral process. I would like to take a moment now to ask you to reflect again on your own experience. Do you feel prepared to address family violence in your consultation? Or will you feel overwhelmed? Unfortunately, we only see the top of the iceberg, which is the image that we use when considering family or gender violence. Why don't victims speak about abuse? What are the barriers that prevent people from disclosing abuse or violence? For most of the women, it takes between 5 to 10 years from the start of the abuse before they reach out for help. I'm speaking about women because most abuse victims are women. If we had been able to meet in person in Berlin, then victims would have shared their reasoning directly with you. As we can, I'll bring you their stories.
Know that I was in an abusive relationship.
I just didn't know where to go. My family will kill me if I divorce, if I leave him.
Honestly, I have nowhere to go. It's my fault. He is a great person.
I love him. I know he will never do it again.
I don't have any money. He's the one who works and maintains us all.
Tommy, naquele momento, eu só queria morrer.
Je ne savais pas que je suis dans une relation abusive. Je ne savais pas avec qui parler.
Neću više ići na policiju. A nisu mi vjerovali i već su komentarisali da je to moja krivica.
E pronto, ir.
Ich fühlte charme und Schuldgefühl.
Eu não tenho nenhum sítio para onde ir. Irina, você me chama de Marega.
This is heartbreaking. It is less than 1 minute, 59 seconds, but it feels like an eternity. Some of the most common causes that prevent victims from speaking out are these: they hope the situation will change, fear of retaliation against themselves or their children, feeling of shame, failure, or guilt. developing a tolerance of violent behavior, dependence, psychological and economic dependence, disabilities, language barriers, or other vulnerabilities, feeling of ambivalence, the Stockholm syndrome, insecurity, fear of the judicial system and legal repercussions, or not knowing who to contact, which services are available, lack of financial support, social network, or family to help out, perhaps due to cultural or religious backgrounds where separation and divorce are not tolerated, unable or reluctant to recognize the cycle of violence. For those who are not familiar with it, it is a cyclical pattern that can take anywhere for some hours to years to complete, and goes like this. Tension starts to build, coming from the stress of everyday life or from major events, such as losing a job or a loved one. The current COVID crisis also generated a lot of stress. During this part of the cycle, the abuser feels ignored, threatened, annoyed, or wrong in some way. The person being abused tries to calm them down or please them in the hope that they can stop the violence or reduce the impact. The tension increases until there's an explosion of violence, and this is when the person being abused is most likely to seek help, denounce or leave their partner, although it doesn't usually happen in the first aggressions. Then there is a period of reconciliation where the abuser feels guilt or remorse and appears the fear that the partner might leave them or call the police. The victim often feels fear, humiliation, disrespect and confusion. Mistakenly, they even feel responsible for what has happened. The abuser might choose to ignore the explosion of violence and pretend that didn't happen, or try to make amends by being more loving or attentive. They might promise that it won't happen again and that they will change. Or ever self-harm or threaten suicide to manipulate the victim emotionally and prevent them from leaving. The abused person might choose to focus only on the good part of the relationship and try to ignore also the explosion. This is the point where they are most likely to withdraw the complaint if one has felt choosing to help their partner with his problem. The calm phase is also considered part of this previous one, where the relationship is relatively calm and peaceful. The abuser may agree to engage in counseling, ask for forgiveness, and try to create a normal family environment. As family increases, the final two phases might disappear, leaving one cycle of tension and aggression. Not all victims experience violence in the same way. Some never go through the honeymoon phase, since the controlling behaviors of their partners are constant. Walker's cycle has received some criticism for being too simplistic. For example, Scott Ellen Johnson developed a 14-stage cycle, which further broke down each stage. But it still helps us to understand how violence occurs and how we might help the victim at each stage. And we have to be aware of it and all these barriers that I have mentioned, because this is a very complex problem. We are not only talking about the victim, but the family and the wider societal, cultural, and geographical community, all of which can play a significant role in whether someone seeks or not help. I became more aware of these issues when I worked as a rural doctor. I had to ask myself where to draw the line of responsibility. My inner voice kept asking me, how far should you intervene? It was really tough, because I also had to think about my own safety. We have been trained in problem solving, not in uncertainty and time management. This kind of situation can be extremely hard to deal with, and it can leave you with a real sense of frustration. But we cannot solve other people's problems for them or take decisions on their behalf. We have to be very resilient and respectful of the victim's needs and timing. Our objective is not to advise the survivor to leave an intimate relationship, but to accompany her reflection and provide continued, patient, certain support as needed, consciously deciding to accept, not action, or on the contrary, look together to ways to overcome them. And this is exactly a patient-centered approach. How can we provide this care? WHO and the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence have published guidelines emphasizing the urgent need to improve education of the frontline professionals. WHO strongly recommends to integrate evidence-based education for intimate partner violence, sexual violence, child abuse, and elder abuse in the curricula at 3 levels: pre-qualification, university, training, specialization, and continuous medical education. The problem is that we don't need only additional training, but we also need to change our behavior. We want to take very good care of our patients. How can we do that? Let's consider this within the context of the COMBI model that assumes that our behavior results from 3 influences: capability, opportunity, and motivation. What is capability? Having the necessary knowledge and skill to handle the task, which is the training that we are going to receive. Motivation relates to attitude and aspiration, not just goals and conscious decision-making, but emotional response and habits. I really want to take care of my patients. Opportunities are these outside factors that make the behavior possible, and we will have plenty of opportunities. Training alone is not enough. All of the above factors should be taken in consideration when seeking the change of behavior. We have to be aware of that if we want to provide an effective intervention. If we keep the parallelism with other healthcare problems, we will have also the opportunity to intervene at the same 3 levels: primary, secondary, and tertiary. Primary prevention. At primary prevention, we are looking at ways to prevent violence from occurring, influences the causes of violence, targeting the whole population of higher risk groups. Following the ecological framework that considers violence as an outcome of interaction among many factors at 4 levels: individual, relationship, community, and society, our intervention should be at all these layers, addressing both the structural contours and the underlying causes. For example, gender inequality and poverty. Examples might include building knowledge and skills of changing behaviors and attitudes. And I can mention a very successful example, the SASA project in Africa, and a step behavioral change in the community, how the involvement of key people, such as activists and leaders, can change their attitude towards beating women or obliging them to have sexual intercourse, reducing episodes of violence significantly. It started in Uganda and now is being implemented in a number of other African countries. This is a best practice that we can also copy. Our role here is limited, but we can contribute to primary prevention by participating in education campaigns, raising awareness, and identifying people at higher risk, individual level, due to dependency, low self-esteem, or previous history of abuse. Identifying other situations of risk or greater vulnerability, such as alcohol or substance abuse, unemployment, pregnancy, family dysfunction, and changes in relationship status, separation or divorce. Record those who show abusive tendency, such as poor impulse control, abusive family backgrounds, poor anger management, and violent tendencies. Being aware of patient profiles can help towards early detection and intervention. What is secondary prevention? It is early detection, preventing recurrency or progression of the violence. Identifying these causes of abuse is considered a priority for healthcare services, especially for us, primary care professionals in the front line. Findings from the last Cochrane review of meta-analysis, as well as WHO guidelines, recommend case finding, that is, asking about abuse whenever there are red flags. Universal screening is recommended only in a specific setting, such as routine care of pregnant women or mental health. We have to be alert to sign and signal of abuse and provide first-line support. Physical injuries are very clear, but as we mentioned, consequences can be very diverse and not always so evident. Our intervention depends on the type of violence, frequency, intensity of the episode of violence, and when the victim is consulting us. Domestic abuse has no specific symptoms we can point to and make a diagnosis. Clinical presentations can vary, and we have to stay alert to these risk factors. Repetitive consultation with unexplained symptoms, family history, as we said, of situations of vulnerability, behavioral clues, can help us to join the dots when other indicators suggest that abuse might be happening. Considering the different presentations listed here, and think about your patients who came with these symptoms. Do you consider family violence as a differential diagnosis? Remember, we only tend to see the tip of the iceberg, a very small part of the problem compared with the majority of cases that we don't see. In order to see the whole iceberg, we have to dive and look beneath the surface. And we have to know how to dive to provide this first-line support. How we can do it? Well, following these 9 steps known as the 9 R's. First, our role. We have to recognize our role as health professionals when dealing with this situation of abuse and embrace that role. Second, readiness. We need to be open with ourselves and our team. This means undertaking training to recognize and manage abuse cases, leaving information on leaflets in our surgeries, and putting procedures in place. If you haven't had any training, don't worry. Take an initiative to learn. We provide workshops in all the conferences, and you are more than welcome to join us. There are also free available resources online, and the WHO Clinical Handbook is a great tool to learn. Recognize, we need to actively look for and identify cases of abuse by observing patient behavior, body language, and asking direct questions in a sensitive way. For example, you can use some exploratory question. How are things at home right now? How are you coping with the stress? You seem worried. Is there anything would you like to discuss with us? But if you have a high level of suspicion, you can make statements and ask directly. Has your partner ever physically threatened or hurt you? Have you ever felt unsafe in the past? Sometimes partners react strongly in arguments and use physical force. Is this happening to you? Is there a lot of tension in your relationship? How do you solve it? Or you can make a statement such as, violence is very common at home, and I used to ask all my patients about it because no one should live in fear in their partners. Dare to ask. When one patient who presents with red flags comes to your practice, ask her privately. Make sure to be empathic with your response. You will see that after you succeed once, you will be able to ask again and do it better. Fourth, response. Provide a safe, private and confidential environment in which patients can disclose abuse to you. Learn to listen with your eyes, ears, and heart without judging. Allow time and being comfortable with the silence. Listen carefully without being intrusive. The act of listening is therapeutic per se. Validate, show that you understand and believe her. Ask about the patient's history of abuse. Assess and respond to your patient's needs and concerns, both emotional, physical, social, and practical, such as setting appointments at convenient times, considering childcare issues, or any other type of help. Addressing these practical needs also helps with emotional well-being and empowerment. It helps to build your patient's confidence and make it more likely that she will ask for help again in the future. Leave the door open. Motivational interview might be helpful to increase their readiness for change in a contemplative phase, moving to the next phase, preparation or action. Help her to explore her options. Feel the risk. Always assess the risk of harm to the victim and their dependents. After disclosure of abuse, if it's known previously, we can ask, is the abuse getting worse? Do you feel safe to stay at home? Are you in immediate danger? And assess also the patient and others living with her. Any children or vulnerable people at risk. We can ask, who else is in the house with you? Are they at risk? Are you worried about your children? This will help to determine the urgency of an intervention. If there is an immediate risk to the person or children, the case must be referred to hospital or reported to a court of law. In the event of sexual assault, the woman should always be referred to a hospital for gynecology or forensic evaluation, or whichever services are available in your country. Comprehensively document this risk assessment according to local procedures, preferably timestamp, and if possible, with photos authorized by the patient or drawings, offering her to report to the authorities if she wants it. Due to safety consideration, this consultation should remain hidden for online access. Even if the patient has not made a direct disclosure, it will be important to document the case, your suspicion, and actions taken. And enhance safety. Discuss a plan to protect her and her family for further harm. What to do, where to go, preparing an emergency bag with keys, document, cash, and other necessities in it. Sixth step, review. Continually follow up with your patients and any actions taken, legal, social, or external support services. Keep track of how the case is progressing. Seventh, refer. Provide information and refer your patient to additional support services, such as advocacy, protection services, or therapeutic support. Violence needs a multidisciplinary approach. We cannot deal with these cases alone. This is so important to know that what are the services available in your area, though it is recommended that you do not suggest couple counseling in such cases of violence. Eighth step, reflect on your own attitudes towards abuse and violence. This will help you to manage complex cases and take care of your emotional well-being, avoiding vicarious trauma. And the ninth step, respect. Respect your patient's wishes and their autonomy, understanding the expectations and desire of the victim, cycle of violence, phase of change, protect contemplation, action, in order to act properly. Because, for example, if there has been an explosion of violence, but the victim is in the pre-contemplation phase, she won't even recognize the abuse as such. An overarching principle of this sensitive work is respect for our patients, colleagues, and ourselves. In summary, first-line support responds to both emotional and practical needs at the same time. To make it easier, we can remember this with the word lives of WHO. How to save lives. Listen, inquire about needs and concerns, validate, enhance safety, and support. And you can use the 5 A's: ask, assess, advise, agree, assist, and arrange. And the last step, tertiary prevention, is the last line of defense when it comes to intimate violence. It is about attempting to prevent death or permanent disability associated with these cases. It also means a more hands-on approach to help victims access other forms of support, such as rehabilitation, specialist mental health treatment, safe housing, relocation, or legal advice. We have to be aware that for being able to provide an effective intervention, our commitment needs to be supported by others. So we have professionals here, ourselves and others, institutional commitment, political commitment, social compromise, and the victim reaction. In order to tackle family violence on a global level, institutional and political commitment is essential. This is especially important nowadays, as COVID-19 has exacerbated the risk of family violence. As happens during conflicts and disaster, violence against women, children, and vulnerable people tends to increase. This is not always reflected in the data collected in real time. Although we don't have enough data yet, reports from across the world suggest a significant increase in family violence during the pandemic. For example, France has reported a 32 to 36% increase following the implementation of self-isolation and quarantine measures. Telephone calls to helplines and professional service have increased in a number of countries across Europe. For example, there was more than 47% surge in the number of calls to Spanish helpline during the first half of April compared with the same period last year. In UK, the National Domestic Abuse Hotline also saw a 29% 5% increase in cold since stay-at-home measures were implemented. Other countries have reported a reduction in the number of abuse survivors seeking services due to a combination of lockdown measures and limited resources. Some victims appear to be refusing to go to health services for fear of COVID infection. People have been encouraged or required to stay at home, which has disrupted social protection networks and increased stress. Homeschooling, spending more time together, and loss of income have worsened this and led to an increased threat of family violence. The lockdown has highlighted the importance of sensitizing the general population on family violence and raising awareness. Think about the ecological framework that we have been speaking about. Family and community members are the most important people in terms of identifying cases. Strengthening community collaboration, communication between neighbors, or even people working in the neighborhoods could play a very important role in the fight to protect abuse victims. They should be equipped with information on local family violence services and are encouraged to report any concerns. There have been interesting initiatives during the pandemic, such as Mascarilla 19 in Spain. It is a code word that can be used for reporting domestic violence in certain places, such as pharmacies. Those places have been trained to treat this code word as a request for help and notify emergency and social services. How is for you to deal with these cases during the COVID-19? For healthcare professionals, teleconsultation might be even more challenging in these cases. And I can highly recommend you the webinar on family violence during COVID-19 that our special interest group have produced last May. There you can find very practical tools and a role play of a telephone consultation for a follow-up. The pandemic has forced many countries to respond with unprecedented measures that have an important social, physiological, and economic impact. Among the consequences, we include this increase of risk of family violence. This should be the commitment of governments and policymakers too, to adopt special and urgent measures to prioritize support for victims, allocating resources, including essential services, to address family violence during COVID-19 that should remain accessible despite physical distancing. Knowing is not enough. We must apply. Willing is not enough. We must do, and we must do it together. Aggressive campaigns are necessary to raise awareness of family violence at all the levels. They need to involve governments, stakeholders, healthcare professionals, and the general population. The message must be clear. Family violence is a violation of human rights, no matter when, where, or how it takes place. Any form of it is unacceptable, and the increased risk of violence during the pandemic cannot be ignored. What are the visions for the future? Or I would say the present. There is a real need for further research into effective intervention for family violence, better exploration, and ongoing advocacy, and other open questions that need to be answered, such as what are the tasks for primary health professionals? Are the same in low and middle income countries or other situations with limited resources? How can we involve more primary care workers in collaborative care? How to improve the communication among us? What are the opportunities to provide a better coordinated care? Or what is the most effective training? We don't have the answers yet. The WONCA Special Interest Group on Family Violence is carrying out a very important project at this moment. It is called Improving Opportunity Through Primary Care and Advocacy for Family Violence, the IMOCAF project, led by former WONCA Sixth Chair, Leo Paz. It aims to develop a consensus at national and international level on how to make better use of existing facilities in order to prevent family violence. This includes developing approaches for identifying cases, conducting immediate assessments, delivering counseling and follow-up services, as well as best practice management and support measurements. 30 countries have already signed up the project, which means we are developing this guidance with strong awareness of cultural and geographic differences. It will be followed by implementation studies based on the best effective models, including training methods, effective awareness raising, and experience building. This is what we are doing right now. I'm speaking about the present. This is not utopia. Another world, a better world, is possible if we work towards the same world together, a zero-tolerance society. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoy the Congress.
Thank you so much, Raquel. This was just amazing. And I think I am most impressed by your presentation and by all you had to say. As you may have seen, there is an extremely lively discussion going on parallelly to this, and many questions being asked. If I try to summarize this, it comes down to 3 questions. Maybe the most important one is, how can a GP address this issue or deal with this issue if he or she is not only the doctor of the victim, but also the doctor of the aggressor, and there is an issue of keeping privacy. The other 2 addressing how can you work under time constraints of a GP office, and what can you do if you don't feel you have enough support of society, and how can a doctor then, be able to help or to find an appropriate referral if there's not much in the society around it. Please, maybe we have time to answer this briefly.
Sure. Thank you so much for attending and all the also the interest of the participant. I think it's a very important topic because we are not aware of the prevalence. So once we keep in mind the high prevalence, then we become interested. I should do something. So first, answering the question of how to deal with the aggressor, we have to be aware that as a family doctors, we take care of the whole family. But in this special situation, like Hagit was underlining, the chair of the Wonka SIP, she was also answering the chat, ideally would be that we are not treating both. And if we have to treat both, that we cannot disclose as a matter of confidentiality. We should not tell each other what is going on. I think it's very important that we become aware that we are not the ones taking care of the situation. We have to do it in a multidisciplinary team. And this is a key point to take care of these cases of violence. So first, you have to know what is your team, what are the resources that you count in your daily practice, because maybe you are not aware of it. And that will be the first step. What are the support that I count in? Maybe I would have much more resources that I know in this moment. And this is answering maybe the third question, the support of the society. We have to know what is the legal framework, what are the abilities and advocacy in my area to work with. So once I know all this information, I will probably feel more comfortable to address this topic because I will have the skills. And then I will have also, as we were speaking in the combi model, I will have also the information. So I don't only have the capabilities, but also the opportunities. What is my support system? And that will help to change maybe my behavior. Regarding the time constraint, that will be also the same. And normally the victims are seeking help frequently. As we said, normally they tend to use healthcare system more than those who are not suffering abuse. So we will have plenty of opportunities probably to open to disclose the situation or to bring the topic on the table, to leave the door open. So don't be afraid if you miss one opportunity, you will have more opportunities to speak with the patients or with the families about it. And as we said also, we have to see as a community as an opportunity also to help us with the disclosure also in these times even more. I don't know if I answer all these questions. I try to be brief because we don't have so much time.
I think you did. And there's a repeated question, did this increase during the COVID pandemic? And you already said it did. Of course, under increasing pressure, this is an increasing problem, is it?
It is, although it's difficult to collect the data. And what we have nowadays is not enough, but comparing with other situations like catastrophes, or like I mentioned, other situations of the same magnitude, it takes time to collect, but the data that we have nowadays are enough to know that because of the measurement, the stress at home is increasing and we have more cases. So we have to be even more aware. It could be more challenging for us as a GPs to deal with the situation. And I think the webinar that we did in May was a fantastic training tool, and you can watch it online. It's in the YouTube channel of Wonka, to have an idea how we could approach this topic. Although it's difficult, because if we don't have a video consultation with a telephone, will be more challenging. But I think it's time to accept that this is another healthcare problem, and it's a huge prevalence. So we cannot avoid it anymore. We have to embrace it and to analyze what is missing for me to face it, and to start actively seeking for training to provide better care for our population.
Thank you. I think actually our time is over, so let me thank you again for this absolutely wonderful final keynote of this conference. I think this is really something to take home, and you're an inspiration.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure. Thank you all for this great opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much. Enjoy the conference.
Well, let's all enjoy the closure of this conference, and see you all back in Amsterdam.